the person. That goes against the rule of law, goes against our judicial system, the way it is supposed to be composed. Now, I think that there is a responsibility on the part of those of us in the legal profession to push back. And those firms that have cut deals so that they can, I guess, keep their profits at, at high levels are not going to earn the respect of other lawyers, and I think will be judged harshly by history when people look back and ask, where were you in 2025? What did you decide to do in 2025? But this is something that I think we've got to push back on in every way that we can. I hope that lawyers, law firms will stand up and push back against these executive orders that are facially and clearly unconstitutional. I mean, if you sue, you're going to win. It is as simple as that.
Final question for you and Barack Obama were close before you became Attorney General. And I think two things that something that you have in common is kind of never too high, never too low. You seem like calm, cool customers, generally. Given that, how freaked out are you, scale 1 to 10, about how bad things are, about how bad these first 2 months are?
Oh, I think I'm at about an 8. I mean, and that's pretty high. I am concerned about what this administration is trying to do. It's not just about trying to protect, students on campuses or trying to find waste, fraud, and abuse. What they're trying to do is reorder our society and to come up with ways in which they take the potential opposition areas and try to just destroy them, whether it's federal employees, whether it's judges, whether it's universities. I am very concerned about that, and I think I'm heartened by the fact that the American people, the Democratic Party, are finally awakening and putting themselves in a position to be in opposition to this in a very strong way.
Yeah, a little turning point last night, I think. Eric Holder, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it, sir.
Sure enough.
Still ahead, Senator Cory Booker's marathon speech inspires a little bit of good trouble. Next.
Let's get in good trouble.
New Jersey Senator Cory Booker's call for action has resonated with voters at home. This Saturday, at least 24 protests are planned across Booker State. The protests, called Hands Off National Day of Action, are part of a larger nationwide protest mobilization aimed at mass mobilizations across the country to take a stand against Donald Trump and Elon Musk dismantling the government, including shutting down Social Security offices and firing federal workers and gutting American science, health, research. As of yesterday afternoon, there were more than 950 protest events planned nationwide by a coalition of over 150 grassroots organizations and progressive groups and nonprofits. Good trouble indeed. That is all in on this Wednesday night. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
I have an impertinent and slightly personal question for you that you may not want to answer.
Please. How
did you get Eric Holder?
Our fantastic booking producer, Diane Seamus, knocking on his door for 5 months straight. It's the Diane special. Persistence, persistence, persistence.
I've been trying to get Eric Holder on my show for like 5 years. And they're like, Chris has Holder tonight. I was like,
well, that happens a lot in reverse. Let me just be clear, but yes.
Well, I am very happy that you got that interview and not at all overwhelmed by jealousy at all, and very supportive of my colleague. Thank you, my friend. Thank you. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. Really happy to have you here. So are you tired of all the winning yet? Are you enjoying all of the greatness? May I introduce you to Tokelau? Tokelau is 3 teeny tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's our best approximation on our mapping software here at MSNBC HQ. Tokelau, again, it's 3 islands. It's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. About 1,500 people live there. One of the 3 islands that makes up Tokelau is apparently known for its famous swimming pigs. As for its economy, Tokelau kind of doesn't register on any international scale of economic measures because Tokelau doesn't really have much of an economy. It's basically subsistence, agriculture, and fishing, and, enjoying the swimming pigs. Donald Trump just imposed an across-the-board, no exceptions, 10% tariff on Tokelau. Take that, Tokelau bandits. You will screw over the United States of America no longer. May I also introduce you to the Keeling Islands. Keeling Islands are roughly halfway between Australia and Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean. Keeling Islands is 27 islands, but 25 of them are uninhabited. Several of those uninhabited islands have a real plastic trash problem, but that is not because anybody lives there, but because plastic trash from other countries makes its way across the Indian Ocean and washes up there. The two islands of the Keeling Islands that are inhabited, out of the 27 islands there, those two inhabited islands have a total population of 593 people. Well, Donald Trump just declared trade war on the Keeling Islands. All 593 Keeling Islanders will now be hit with an American government 10% tariff that will apply to, you know, anything they might ever want to export here to us. You know, make it here, Keeling Islands, if you're going to make it. May I introduce you to Jan Mayen Island. It is a volcano, a volcanic island mostly covered in glaciers, hundreds of miles from anything else in the Arctic Ocean. Jan Mayen, I think that's how you say it. It does have an airstrip, but nobody lives there. Population 0 humans, many polar bears. That said, rest assured, we, the American people, are now protected from the predatory economic piracy of that uninhabited island. Thanks to our genius strongman ruler who has put the American government to work, Donald Trump has just slapped a 10% tariff on Jan Mayen Island, just in case anyone ever moves up there and tries to screw us over with their Jan Mayen Island underpriced exports and stuff. On the other end of the world, there's Heard, H-E-A-R-D, Heard Island, and also McDonald Island. They're in Antarctica. They are only reachable by boat, and it takes 2 weeks by sea to get there from Australia. Heard and, what's the other one? McDonald Island, sorry. Heard and McDonald Island, I know I don't have to apologize. I'm not offending anybody. They're totally uninhabited, both of them. They're also active volcanoes, so even if you wanted to move there, even the penguins might caution you, right? But they're active volcanoes, one on each island, on both Heard and McDonald Islands. I will say those volcanoes and the penguins and seals who live there, they will never menace the American economy again as they have in the past by flooding us with their cheap exports of what, like fresh air, cool breezes, a waft of eau de penguin? I don't know. What do they send us? The uninhabited Antarctic volcanoes of Heard and McDonald Islands were just slapped by Donald Trump today with a steep 10% tariff. Are you tired of all the winning, America? Can you just feel the practical economic benefits that MAGA leadership is bringing to us at last? Isn't it a relief? Agence France Presse picked up on another one of these as well. This is super genius. Quote, Britain's Falkland Islands, population 3,200 people and around 1 million penguins, got particular punishment from Trump's tariffs today. Quote, the South Atlantic territory was walloped with tariffs of not 10%, but 41% on exports to the United States. 41% tariff on the Falkland Islands because, yeah. Our president waited until late in the day to announce these genius tariffs today. He waited specifically until just after 4 p.m. Eastern time because the financial markets close at 4 p.m. Eastern time, and he didn't want to see that reaction in real time. After the markets close, there's no active trading on the American stock markets, right? But people trade in futures that indicate essentially what they think the markets are going to do when they open up tomorrow. This is the lead right now at CNBC.com explaining how that's going. Quote, U.S. stock futures cratered as President Donald Trump unveiled sweeping tariffs of at least 10% and even higher for some countries, raising the risks of a global trade war that hits the already sputtering U.S. economy. Futures tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 1,069 points, or 2.5%. S&P 500 futures dropped 3.6%. NASDAQ 100 futures lost 4.5%. Yeah, are you tired of all the winning? Did you vote for the rich guy because you thought he'd be good with money? CNBC quotes Art Hogan, chief market strategist at B. Riley Wealth Management, saying, quote, what was delivered was as haphazard as anything this administration has done to date. And the level of complication on top of the ultimate level of the new tariffs is worse than had been feared and not yet priced into the market. At the New York Times, they described a broad range of economists, quote, revising their forecasts down for growth and up for inflation as a result of Mr. Trump's announcement. Nancy Lazar, chief global economist at Piper Sandler, had previously expected a flat next quarter in terms of U.S. economic growth. She now expects that U.S. economic growth in the second quarter may be negative. It may fall 1%. Quote, because you're going to be increasing prices more aggressively, and it's going to negatively impact the consumer space more than we had anticipated. She said, quote, it's an immediate hit to the economy. And when she says it's going to negatively impact the consumer space, that's where we all live. That's the negatively impacted space, the place where regular humans live and have to spend money on stuff. We, in our office, contacted Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman just after Trump made his announcement today to ask his initial reaction. He told us this, quote, Trump's tariff announcement was full-on crazy. Not only is he imposing higher tariffs than almost anyone expected, but he's justifying them with completely false claims about other countries' tariffs. I don't know where his numbers are coming from, but they have nothing to do with reality. Krugman told us, quote, it's a really bad day for the U.S. economy. Now, here's something interesting. I think a lot of what Trump is trying to do in his style of leadership, as it were, is trying to create not only the impression of success when it's not there, like him saying his first 2 months in office have been perfect, which is hilarious, but he's also trying to create an impression that he is omnipotent, that he has all the power. He has powers that no other president has ever had. He has all the power, and nobody else in the U.S. government, nobody else in the United States of America has any power to do anything of their own, let alone any power to stop him. But to that point, it's worth getting specific about this. The reason we are all spectators here, while Donald Trump purposefully craters the U.S. economy and threatens to throw the entire world into a pointless trade war-fueled recession, if not depression, which is what he's doing tonight. The reason we're all spectators to that is because he has given himself, he says, the power to do this all by himself. When he was sworn in for the second term, he declared an economic emergency that would allow him to just burp out tariff proclamations on his own say-so whenever he felt like it, with nobody else in the government having to be involved in it at all. All because he said it's an emergency. Now, quick reminder here that when the previous president, Joe Biden, was leaving office, The Economist magazine decided to do a special report on the state of the U.S. economy that was being left to the next president. This was The Economist cover for that special report. It shows the U.S. economy as a bundle of bills posing as a rocket ship soaring into outer space. The headline, quote, America's economy, the envy of the world. But then the new president took over, Donald Trump got in, and he immediately declared that this envy of the world economy was a complete disaster. It was an emergency. So much so that he needed, effectively, dictatorial powers to set new economic policies by fiat, just on his own say-so. Whatever he feels like is policy, it's just in effect because he said it. And with those emergency powers, that's how he's been able to single-handedly do his best to destroy the U.S. economy and potentially much of the industrialized world economies. There is a way, a legal way, a policy way to interrupt this dictatorship mid-catastrophe. And I don't mean time traveling back to last October to show voters tonight's headlines, although I do fantasize about doing something like that all the time. No, the actual way to stop this dictatorship mid-catastrophe, the way to stop this part of Trump's one-man wrecking ball operation against the U.S. economy is for Congress to do something very simple. For Congress to simply declare with a simple majority vote that actually there isn't an emergency. Yes, Trump proclaimed an economic emergency. That's how he gave himself these emergency powers. But Congress could simply just say, actually, no, there isn't an economic emergency. So, no, he no longer has these powers. He is no longer empowered to single-handedly drunk drive our country into this particular wall. They could do that. And tonight, the United States Senate did. They actually passed a bill like that about the supposed economic emergency we're in with regard to Canada. And they passed this resolution in the Senate that expressly says there is no economic emergency here. They passed it 51-48. All Democratic senators supported it, and so did these 4 Republican senators, Rand Paul, Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, and Lisa Murkowski. Gave us a 51-48 vote. And that means it passes. It only takes a simple majority to pass this kind of resolution in the Senate. And so this resolution, effectively taking away some of Trump's emergency powers to set tariffs on his own say-so, it has passed the Senate. And that means it now goes to the House. And in the House, Democrats have been trying to bring up this exact same resolution since Trump started bludgeoning the economy with these tariff announcements. The House, like the Senate, is controlled by Republicans. But just like the Senate, the House is probably likely to pass this resolution if it got a vote. All the Democrats would vote for it, and enough Republicans in the House probably would join with Democrats to pass it. And if they did, with the Senate passing it and the House passing it, that would mean that the proverbial gun was taken out of Trump's hand and he could be stopped from shooting any more holes into the American economy and the global economy. The problem is that the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, saw this coming and took a dramatic and bizarre step to prevent any possibility that the House of Representatives would ever have to vote on anything like this to take away Trump's powers. The rule is if somebody brings up this kind of resolution in the House, after a certain number of days, it's supposed to be mandatory that it actually gets a vote. In order to avoid that mandatory vote, House Speaker Mike Johnson got the House to proclaim that the whole rest of this year in Congress is one long day. The whole rest of this Congress only counts as one calendar day. So that means multiple days will never elapse, technically, and that means they will never be forced to take the vote in the House, which would pass. And if it passed, that would save the American people and the American economy and the global economy from the tariff disaster that Trump is unilaterally imposing under emergency powers that allow him to act by fiat as if he is a dictator. So in other words, there is a cure to this disease. There is a readily available, dramatically effective, proven, legal antidote to this poison. And Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson grabbed it out of our hands and flushed it down the toilet to make sure we can never take it so Donald Trump can keep doing this to the economy. Are you tired of all the winning? The vote tonight in the Senate to take away these emergency powers from Trump, with which he's doing all the tariff stuff. That vote in the Senate tonight does happen to be the largest and most significant rebuke to Trump that congressional Republicans have yet mustered in his second term in office. Theoretically, if people could pressure Mike Johnson into allowing a vote on this same resolution in the House, it would actually be a rebuke that meant something, that maybe saved the economy. But unless and until that happens, some Senate Republicans have shown a little strength here, but until anything happens in the House, it's Trump and House Republicans standing together to throw us all off the cliff. Also, we can slap those Antarctic penguins with big tariffs in case they ever turn into humans and start making stuff that they might want to sell us. That'll show them. And, you know, I don't know if these actions by Trump and congressional Republicans are why. Americans are sort of showing how they feel about Republicans in the way they are right now. But it does, this stuff about the economy, it does coincide with this big flurry of election results we've just had in the past week, in which Democrats are doing very, very well and Republicans are doing very poorly. Republicans are at least losing huge amounts of ground, if not just losing altogether. We're going to speak momentarily with Wisconsin Democratic Party Chairman Ben Wickler after that stunning 10-point win last night by the Democratic-backed candidate in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race. She was up against a Trump-endorsed ultra-MAGA candidate. He benefited not only from $25 million from Elon Musk, but also from a last-minute blockbuster campaign event hosted by Musk in Wisconsin, in which he gave out million-dollar checks and told Wisconsin voters that the fate of humanity rested on whether or not this MAGA candidate guy was going to win. Turns out none of that worked. We probably should have seen the result coming when we saw the big, feisty, very fired up protests in Green Bay, Wisconsin, the day of Elon Musk's event there this weekend. People covered both sides of the street. They made tons of noise. You see them with they had a huge wraparound banner that says "Wisconsin not for sale." I mean, there was many signs at that protest there against Elon Musk as against Brad Schimmel, as against Musk and Trump's candidate for that Supreme Court seat. And of course, as I mentioned, this was Green Bay, Wisconsin, so they're blunt. Packer fans don't like Nazis. After the results came in last night, one Republican Party county chair in Wisconsin told Politico.com, quote, "I'm honestly shocked. I thought we had it in the bag. I thought Musk was going to be an asset for this race." Really? Have you looked around recently? Have you talked to any of your neighbors? So in Wisconsin, Susan Crawford won easily against Trump and Musk's candidate in that Supreme Court race. But it wasn't just her. There was also a superintendent of schools race, statewide race in Wisconsin. That went the same way, with the Democratic-backed candidate beating the Republican-backed candidate, and pretty easily. In those two deep, deep red congressional districts in Florida that also had elections last night, we saw the Republican candidates win in both, but Democrats cut way, way into their margins. Trump won in both of those districts by at least 30 points just in November. But last night, Democratic candidates cut those margins at least in half. Democratic candidate Josh Weil ran in Florida's 6th district. He said the issue that resonated the strongest with voters for his campaign was definitely Trump and Musk attacking Social Security, something that I think Democrats all over the country are taking note of. Aurora, Illinois is the second largest city in Illinois after Chicago. They had their mayoral race last night. Now, the incumbent mayor in Aurora was a Republican-backed mayor. He was first elected in 2017. He was easily reelected in 2021. He expected to be reelected again last night. But the Republican-backed mayor of Aurora, Illinois, was ousted last night, lost his seat to a challenger who was backed by Democrats. Last night's wins and surprisingly good showings for Democrats also follow, I think, some undercovered election results from Louisiana this past weekend. The Republican governor in Louisiana and the Republican-led legislature there put 4 different constitutional amendments before voters in Louisiana this weekend, and they lost. All 4 of them lost in Louisiana. One independent Louisiana pollster interviewed by the Louisiana Illuminator explained that even in red state Louisiana, there was basically no keeping up with the organization and outrage on the Democratic side, even with the Republican governor and the Republican legislature all lined up behind these constitutional amendments. They couldn't get any traction. Starting early on in the process, quote, Democrats and black voters showed up in far greater numbers than Republicans during the early voting period. The pollster said, quote, I have just never seen an early vote this strong for Democrats. That follows, of course, other special elections earlier this year where we've seen Democrats pick up legislative seats in deep, deep red districts in places as far-flung as Amish country in Pennsylvania and in the great state of Iowa. And, you know, it's in part probably some of these election results. It's in part, I think, some of the polling about how outraged and disgusted the American people are with what Trump and Musk are doing in Washington. I think it's in significant part what people are seeing on street corners, out in front of Tesla dealerships, out in front of Social Security offices and VA offices, with Americans protesting every single freaking day of the week now against what Trump and Musk are doing. I mean, you put it all together, we're really starting to see some wind in elected Democrats' sails, with, of course, Democratic Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey galvanizing national support and national attention, rapturous attention from Democrats and critics of Trump and Musk, with his record-setting 25-hour-plus filibuster against Trump that ended last night. We've now got Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego saying that he will personally block all Trump nominations to the VA in protest of Trump's deep cuts to VA personnel. We've got Hawaii Senator Brian Schatz, of course, putting a hold against all Trump nominees to the State Department in protest of Trump's dismantling USAID. We've now, on top of that, got California Senator Adam Schiff putting a hold on Trump's nomination of Ed Martin to be U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. Ed Martin, who was personally at January 6th and has been using the powers of the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. as its interim chief, exactly the way you think it might be used by someone who was at January 6th for Trump's attempt to violently overthrow the U.S. government and install himself in power for life. Today at Tufts University in Massachusetts, students walked out in support of the Tufts University grad student who was snatched off the street by masked federal agents this past week and flown to an immigration prison in Louisiana despite a judge's order that she not be moved out of state. Yesterday in Tennessee, did you see this footage? Look at this. This is an 80-year-old woman who was arrested at the state legislature in protest. She refused to leave. She was there in protest of Republican policies targeting even elementary school kids for arrest and deportation. She told state troopers in Tennessee that she did not mind being arrested, but she was not going to help them do it. They were going to have to carry her out. The troopers picked her up out of her chair and carried her out of the state capitol, 80 years old. They then put her in the patrol car and took her off to jail, bodily. Today in Washington, outside the Supreme Court, a raucous, loud, rollicking protest with a good sense of humor. While the Supreme Court heard another Republican abortion ban case, one of the things they did here at this protest is they made fake magazine covers, which you can see here. It's a fake People magazine cover there that says, Brett Kavanaugh, sexist man alive. A fake Scientific American, unscientific American cover featuring Samuel Alito instead of Alito. The FDA, who needs it when we've got Joe Rogan? Also a mock-up of Time magazine, Turn Back Time magazine. John Roberts, the man who presided over the death of the Constitution. And that was outside the Supreme Court today. Also in Washington today, a rally outside the Capitol, a rally in protest opposing federal cuts to HIV funding. Trump this week just absolutely decimating the FDA and the CDC, cutting core government funding for everything from HIV to Alzheimer's to bird flu to IVF to measles to everything in between. We are going to see hundreds of protests all across the country this weekend, Saturday, April 5th, what is likely to be the largest yet day of protest against this administration in these 70-some days since they've been in office. Tonight here on this show, we've got former FDA Commissioner David Kessler here in person. We've got Wisconsin Democratic Party Chairman Ben Wickler here. So much to get to tonight. So much winning. Stay with us.
Duck this on April 1st. Start to go lame duck. Then we win. Then we win the Virginia governor's race. Lame duck more. We have to take this like you do cleaning the house or whatever, one chunk at a time. And America's first chunk of cleaning is Wisconsin Supreme Court, April 1st.
You can start to lame duck this thing on April 1st. Take it one chunk at a time. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz paid a neighborly visit a couple of weeks ago to Eau Claire, Wisconsin. He told people to not look 4 years down the road to the next presidential election. He said, look just ahead. Look to the race for Wisconsin Supreme Court, April 1st. Start to lame duck this thing now. And, of course, last night, Wisconsin went to the polls and they elected the Democratic-backed candidate to the state Supreme Court, and they elected her by a lot. Susan Crawford beat the conservative candidate by 10 points, which tells you a little something about the political temperature right now in a swing state where Trump actually won in November. After the results came in last night, Wisconsin's Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler said this. He said, Wisconsin Supreme Court election demonstrates Musk and Trump have gone too far, and any politician allied with them could swiftly face the end of their career. He said, quote, in a moment of national darkness, Wisconsin voters lit a candle. Let the lesson of Wisconsin's election ring out across the country. Hope is not lost. Democracy can yet survive. And the voice of the American people will not be silenced. Joining us now is Ben Wickler, chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, who hasn't slept in weeks. Mr. Wickler, thank you so much for being here, and congratulations on a victory I know you fought really hard for last night.
Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to Susan Crawford, who never wavered in the face of the richest person in the world coming after her with things that have never been thrown at any judicial candidate anywhere ever, and held firm to her belief in integrity and democracy and the rule of law, in freedom, in what this country is supposed to stand for. And voters responded at a level we've never seen in our state. I just want to share a fact that I crunched today. Susan Crawford running for Supreme Court in an April election in Wisconsin. These are normally low turnout races. Most people don't tune into at all. She got more votes than any Republican running for governor of Wisconsin has ever earned this spring.
Wow. That's almost hard to get your head around. Ben, let me ask you about the money part of this. I mean, in politics, like when you take political science classes, sometimes you use money as a substitute for all other available metrics in terms of figuring out what kind of elections you should expect or look forward to. What are the lessons from this race where Susan Crawford was up against essentially infinite money, more money than had ever been shoveled into a judicial race by any single donor ever, more money overall in any judicial race ever in the history of this country, and more money as a possibility, a donor with zero ceiling on what he could have spent. I mean, most people facing an electoral sort of horizon like that would think that they had no chance. What did you learn in Wisconsin about what it is to run against a bottomless checkbook?
Well, Susan Crawford, I think, just delivered a masterclass, because when Elon Musk started going after her, instead of shrinking back or trying to find some way to convince him to withdraw from the race or tone it down, she went straight after him. She started saying on the campaign trail, I never thought growing up as a little girl in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, that I'd be up against the richest man in the world. And people would erupt in applause. Her fundraising on Act Blue, it raised more money every day than it used to cost to run an entire Supreme Court race in the state of Wisconsin. So we were outspent. Susan Crawford and the Democratic Party, we were outspent by Elon Musk and the forces of the far right. There were other far right billionaires that got in too, but we weren't out-communicated or out-organized because literally hundreds of thousands of people wound up chipping in, and thousands of people made phone calls, knocked on doors, got involved, spread the word. We've tracked millions and millions of conversations that happened between volunteers and supporters of Susan Crawford and Wisconsin voters. And all of that added up not just to a hairline victory, it was a landslide. This is a state where elections routinely come down to less than 1 percentage point. You know, Elon Musk came to Wisconsin and he put on a cheesehead and he tried to bribe Wisconsin voters. And the message of fury that ignited, the only real response is to say that Wisconsin's not for sale. And you can't just come into Wisconsin and think that you can take the cheesehead and give an affront to our voters. But this same kind of fight is possible everywhere, no matter what you put on your head. People can fight back against the oligarchy. There's still enough democracy left that no matter where you are, it is possible to organize, to get together, to support people who actually have conviction and values and believe in something bigger than themselves. Because what Elon Musk doesn't get is that people in politics don't have to just be out for themselves. They don't have to be trying to attempt to loot the federal government. Trump doesn't get this either. There's something bigger at the heart of what it means to be an American and what it means to be a patriot in this country that is about a belief in the United States of America. And I think in this race, we saw in Wisconsin, in this one purple state, the kind of energy that comes out when people realize that by acting together, they can overcome the richest and most powerful people in the world in service of a country that works for everyone.
A resounding result last night, and very well articulated by the chairman of the Wisconsin State Democratic Party, Ben Wickler, here tonight. Ben, congratulations again, and thanks for joining us tonight. And I'm amazed you didn't even mess up your hair. That was beautifully done.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, more news ahead with us here tonight. Stay with us. This week, President Trump attended a Women's History Month event. I know you thought that wasn't allowed anymore. But there was Donald Trump hosting a women's history event at the White House. At this event, he displayed his well-known knack for speaking about women in a totally normal and non-creepy way. He said, quote, "We're going to have tremendous, tremendous goodies in the bag for women, too. The women, between the fertilization and all of the other things that we're talking about, it's going to be great. Fertilization. I'm still very proud of it. I don't care. I'll be known as the fertilization president, and that's okay. That's not bad. That's not bad. I've been called much worse. Actually, I like it, right? I like it. Thank you. I'll be known as the fertilization president." We think he's referring to IVF treatments, which he promised as a candidate would be free if he got elected, after other Republicans were supporting banning IVF. Anyway, well, how's that going? Headline, CDC's IVF team gutted, even as Trump calls himself the fertilization president. Quote, "A team that tracked how well in vitro fertilization worked across the U.S. was abruptly cut Tuesday as part of the sweeping layoffs at the Department of Health and Human Services." One team member telling NBC News, quote, "It's surprising to me. President Trump said he was the fertility president. How does cutting this program support that?" The Trump administration has given out zero information on the 10,000 people it fired yesterday from federal health organizations. And so we're only now starting to piece together the scale of the carnage as these 10,000 fired government workers start to speak up and talk to the press or post to social media about what has happened inside their agencies and what jobs they were fired from. I mean, this is just a sampling. At the FDA, quote, "Offices focused on food, drug, and medical device policy were hit with deep staff reductions." At the CDC, fired employees included those studying injuries, asthma, lead poisoning, smoking, and radiation damage, as well as those that assess the health effects of extreme heat and wildfires. HIV prevention was a big target, including teams leading HIV surveillance and research, and a group of health researchers who were working on preventing transmission of HIV from mother to child. The AP says, quote, "Scores of government employees who help administer the early childhood program Head Start have been put on leave. Preschool operators say they have received no communication from the Office of Head Start and don't know who to turn to." NBC News reports that several divisions at HHS focused on the safety of people who work in mining. Those divisions were cut entirely. The whole office that administers LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, that whole office is gone. That's a program that literally keeps the heat on in millions of American homes through the winter. They just zeroed it out. From NPR, quote, "HHS layoffs hit Meals on Wheels and other services for seniors and disabled people. At least 40% of staff in those areas fired." Wired magazine reports that the CDC's vessel sanitation program has been eliminated. It, quote, "helps the cruise industry prevent public health issues, inspects cruises, and provides information on outbreaks." Let's definitely get rid of that. Also gone, the branch of our government that works to eliminate childhood lead poisoning. Like I said, we are piecing this together from what we can discern from the firings, oftentimes from what we hear from the people themselves who have been fired. What we are piecing together appears to be a portrait of pretty total destruction of the most advanced scientific and health institutions in the entire world. Former FDA Commissioner David Kessler joins us here next. Stay with us. During COVID, here on this show in particular, you may remember he became a familiar, even reassuring voice during a very deeply scary time. Now, with what appears to be the wholesale gutting of the country's health infrastructure currently underway and as yet poorly understood, there's only one person I really wanted to talk to. Joining us now is Dr. David Kessler, former FDA Commissioner, former Chief Science Officer for the Biden administration's COVID-19 response. Dr. Kessler, it's really nice to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
What's your reaction to what we know thus far of these cuts?
I think they're endangering the lives of all Americans. You alluded to it. Those nights during COVID that you had me on, I mean, there were some dark nights. Deaths, what, 3,000, 4,000? You even mentioned one of those nights. You were on the ledge,
Yeah.
right? My job, I was able to walk you back a little.
Yeah.
I was able to say, we were able to say, it's going to be okay. The reason I was able to do that, because we had people like Peter Marks, Julie Turney, we had people who had expertise that allowed us to get through this, the right drugs, the right vaccines, the right doses. They were fired. We are less safe today because of these cuts that have happened the last several days. I always thought that things were fixable, right? You could fix things. I am very concerned that if these cuts are not rescinded, these will have effect for decades.
You think that the way they have done these cuts, the people they've cut, the number of jobs they've cut, potentially have created a crisis in which we can't ever have these institutions back at strength?
I think we're very close to that. I wonder whether the president really even knows, the extent of what has been done. Remember that night that he was taken by helicopter to Walter Reed? Mm-hmm. He was having difficulty breathing. He had COVID. He was very sick, right? He was given 2 monoclonal antibodies, right? He referenced those as miracles. They were cures. All of a sudden, he got better. I mean, he could have died, but for those drugs. Dr. Peter Stein's office made available those drugs to the president and to thousands of others. Peter Stein was fired, was let go. I don't think the president knows that. Someone needs to walk into the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, we just fired the person who may have saved your life.
From what you know of, part of the difficulty of covering this story is that it is hard to understand the scale of what's happened and to contextualize it to understand, A, because nothing like this has ever happened before, but also because there's been no announcement of what they have done other than this sort of pablum from the HHS secretary, forgive me, where he's talking about the revolution has begun and all of this other non-specific stuff. From what you know of who has been fired and what offices have been dismantled, does it say anything to you about there being a strategy at work? Is this the wish list of some right-wing group that's always wanted to destroy U.S. health infrastructure? I mean, is there any pattern here that you can discern to what they've done?
It is devastating, but it is haphazard.
Oh.
It is thoughtless, and it is chaotic. I don't think they fully understand what they are done. Look, bad stuff is going to happen on their watch that they're going to have to deal with. And they're not going to be equipped to do that. That's what's going to happen. But we have to be careful, though. This is not just about FDA, or NIH or CDC. I mean, you see what's going on in the universities. We have to be very careful. I mean, the thing that has made, America great, that it's made America competitive, there's a lot of things. But the biomedical infrastructure, right, the advances, the reason we are able to live long and productive lives, right, are because of the investment, not because we're smarter today, but because of the investment we made 50, 75 years ago, and that's being destroyed. And it's across the board. We have to rescind these cuts. Enough is enough.
When you think about the kinds of things that are going to come over the transom to America's health officials now, the kinds of things that they're going to need to respond to that you say they will not have the people in place to respond to adequately. Categorically, what kind of things are those? What are the things they're not foreseeing that they're going to need these people they've just fired?
Probably the 2 most knowledgeable people about bird flu, gone. People who look at the toxins that are in our food, those programs are gutted. The people who are going to just answer the phones right, to make sure that the next emergency use of that drug, like the president got, they're not there to answer those calls anymore, to make that available to the average citizen, right? The president has to be informed of what the extent of these cuts are. And we have maybe a week, before this becomes beyond fixable.
David Kessler, former commissioner of the FDA, chief science officer for the Biden administration's COVID-19 response, and friend to this show in many ways. Sir, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with you on Friday. Forgive me. Please understand. All right, that does it for me for now. Now it's time for the last word with the great Lawrence O'Donnell.
Rachel, you're forgiven. I speak for the entire audience when I say that. By the way, Dr. Kessler's discussion with you was just haunting. And the idea that Donald Trump has now fired the person who probably saved his life is, I guess, the kind of flawlessly fitting big footnote to where we are in Trump governance tonight.
I also think that Dr. Kessler he knows these things. I mean, he has been there and he understands how these things work. And I think he may really be right that Trump does not know that.
Yeah.
That Trump doesn't know that the man who made it possible for him to get those monoclonal antibodies that kept him alive when he might have otherwise died. I'm not sure that Trump knows that. We've had some noise about how the White House has tried to duplicate the communication structure that should exist under Secretary Kennedy at the health system at HHS, and that may be because I don't know if Kennedy knows what he's doing, but it seems like the White House has no idea what Kennedy is doing. And it may be that the White House does not understand the scale of what Kennedy has just done here. I think Dr. Kessler's suggestion that somebody needs to tell Trump what has just happened is actually a very modest and very sober thing to do.
Yeah, I thought it made perfect sense the way he was saying it to you on your program. We have Mallory McMorrow joining us here tonight. She is the new Senate candidate in Michigan, United States Senate candidate, hugely important Senate election next year in Michigan. This will be her first night on the program as a Senate candidate.
That's great. She was, when I saw that announcement today, I thought, oh, okay, now we're talking. Now we're talking a real race there. She's a really big deal. That's going to be a great interview.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you.
All right.
Well, the breaking news of the night is that Donald Trump has lost another very important vote. That makes 2 nights in a row of breaking news about Donald Trump being on the losing side of a very important vote. Last night, the voters of Wisconsin crushed Donald Trump and Elon Musk's candidate for a state Supreme Court justice, and instead elected the candidate supported by the Democratic Party in Wisconsin, Susan Crawford, to be the next elected Supreme Court justice in the state of Wisconsin. But tonight, the Republican-controlled United States Senate made history by voting against Donald Trump for the first time. Donald Trump lost the vote in the United States Senate tonight. 4 Republican senators joined all the Democrats in voting against Donald Trump tonight in the United States Senate, 51-48, in favor of a resolution that would nullify any claim of presidential authority to impose tariffs on Canada. This is the first big crack in the wall of Republican senatorial support for Donald Trump. Republicans voting against the Trump-Canadian tariffs in the Senate were Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Susan Collins, Senator Lisa Murkowski, and Senator Rand Paul. Donald Trump began his day with a social media post attacking those 4 senators, and still they defied Donald Trump. Rand Paul said as clearly as I have been saying for years the truth that other Republicans dare not say, that tariffs are taxes on the American people.
Tariffs are a terrible mistake. They don't work. They will lead to higher prices. They are a tax, and they have historically been bad for our economy.
Donald Trump's secret is out. Tariffs are a tax on American consumers only. Foreign countries don't pay those taxes. Trump supporters wouldn't believe me when I was telling them that for years, but now Republicans are saying it loud and saying it clear. Mitch McConnell said it today. Now the financial networks like CNBC are saying it constantly. And tonight, the Wall Street Journal, in its editorial in response to Donald Trump's announcement of the new tariffs today, said tariffs are taxes, pure and simple. Back in the 20th century, a nerdy right-wing Republican in Washington who never held elected office named Grover Norquist bent the entire Republican Party in Washington to his will. It was pathetic to watch. In effect, he forced them to sign a pledge to never vote for an increase in taxes of any kind. And every single Republican member of the United States Senate signed where Grover Norquist ordered them to sign. Every Republican presidential candidate signed where Grover Norquist required them to sign in order to be Republican candidates. And almost every Republican member of the House of Representatives signed exactly where Grover Norquist ordered them to sign, to never, ever, ever support an increase in taxation of any form. Republicans lived in fear of this guy, that guy right there in the middle. At the time, I declared Grover Norquist to be the most powerful unelected person in Washington because on one issue anyway, he had complete control over one of our political parties. Former Republican presidential campaign manager, my friend Stuart Stevens, wrote a book about the Grover Norquist-controlled Republican Party after Donald Trump was elected president, and he titled that book, "It Was All a Lie." It turns out Grover Norquist was and is a lie. Grover Norquist has revealed himself not to be a principled anti-tax crusader, as has every Republican member of the Senate and House of Representatives, because at some point, every single one of them has supported Donald Trump's increase in taxation on Americans through tariffs, which are sales taxes administered only on goods imported into this country and paid only by Americans in this country. Every one of those Republicans has either actively supported those taxes by Donald Trump or held their cowardly silence about them. And Grover Norquist, the nerd who was once perceived as the toughest Republican operative in Washington, is hiding tonight in his permanent cocoon of cowardly silence about Donald Trump's sales taxes, Donald Trump's tariffs. The last time the gasoline tax was increased in the United States of America was 32 years ago, with only Democratic votes in the House and the Senate. And Grover Norquist was outraged that Democrats, and Democrats only, voted to increase the gasoline tax in America. In 1993, the Democrats voted to increase the gasoline tax by 4.3 cents. And Grover Norquist screamed at the top of his histrionic on anti-tax lungs about what a horrible burden an additional 4.3 cents a gallon of gasoline would be in America, what burden it would be for American drivers. And I'll never forget that outrage about the 4.3 cent increase in the gasoline tax, because I was working in the United States Senate at the time as the chief of staff of the Senate Finance Committee, and I personally negotiated that number, 4.3 cents, with the staff of a Democratic senator who was the final holdout on the gas tax increase, the final vote that we needed to get it through the committee. We actually started off by trying to increase it by a dime, but in the desperate last-minute negotiations to get that final vote in the Senate Finance Committee, the most I could get was 4.3 cents, which at the time was roughly a 2% increase in the cost of a gallon of gasoline, 2%. And Grover Norquist went crazy. And every Republican in the Senate and the House, including Mitch McConnell then in the Senate, claimed that the Democrats were crushing the American consumer with that increase in the gasoline tax, 4.3 cents. Newt Gingrich used it in his insurgent campaign to win control of the House of Representatives for Republicans in the next election for the first time in 40 years. And tonight, Newt Gingrich supports 54% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing, and 25% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing, and 10% sales taxes that Donald Trump is imposing on everything the United States of America imports from anywhere in the world. That 4.3-cent increase in the gasoline tax in 1993 was part of a complex deficit reduction legislation bill, huge bill, signed by President Clinton that included spending cuts and tax increases aimed at reducing the deficit, which is exactly what it successfully did. It was at the time the biggest tax increase in history, but that record has been broken. Broken by Donald Trump. Republican Mike Pence, who signed Grover Norquist's anti-tax pledge in order to win his seat in the House of Representatives, tweeted tonight, the Trump tariff tax is the largest peacetime tax hike in U.S. history. These tariffs are nearly 10 times the size of those imposed during the Trump-Pence administration and will cost American families over $3,500 per year. And so tonight, we have a new winner for biggest tax increase in history, Donald Trump and his faithful and mostly cowardly supporters in Congress. As I said, Donald Trump attacked the 4 senators who voted against him tonight in a social media post this morning, saying Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, and Rand Paul, also of Kentucky, will hopefully get on the Republican bandwagon for a change and fight the Democrats' wild and flagrant push to not penalize Canada. To the people of the great states of Kentucky, Alaska, and Maine, please contact these senators and get them to finally adhere to Republican values and ideals. Senator Collins explained on the Senate floor why the people of Maine did not burn up her office telephones today, demanding a trade war with Canada. Donald Trump, of course, wouldn't have understood everything she said because he, of course, has no idea which country Prince Edward Island is in.
For example, many Maine blueberries are processed in Prince Edward Island. Maine also sends between $200 million and $400 million worth of lobster to Canada each year for processing. There are 240 lobster processing plants in Canada, but only 15 in the United States. I share the president's goal of getting more of that manufacturing done in the state of Maine, done in the United States. But the fact is that if we impose these tariffs on Canadian processing, it's going to be our Maine lobstermen who will bear the cost. It's going to be consumers who bear the cost. The price hikes that will happen for Maine families, every time they go to the grocery store, they fill their gas tank, they fill their heating oil tank. If these tariffs go into effect, will be so harmful. And as price hikes always do, they will hurt those the most who can afford them the least.
The people who can afford them the least. Grover Norquist doesn't care about those people. He never has. Donald Trump doesn't care about those people. He never has, never will. 48 Republican senators do not care about those people. And no Republican members of the House of Representatives care about those people. Not one of them. Everyone who pulls up lobster pots in Maine for a living knows something else Donald Trump doesn't know, which is the biggest foreign customer in the world for Maine lobster is China. And so the people of Maine did not demand that Susan Collins get in line with the madman who wants a trade war with Canada and the world. In the country where Rand Paul grew up and where I grew up and where you grew up, presidents didn't control tariffs. Congress did. A couple of obscure laws passed by Congress decades ago gave the president power to adjust tariffs only in a national emergency, which basically meant something like a world war. Donald Trump's claim of emergency conditions as the legal justification of his tariff orders today is provably false, especially when it comes to as good a neighboring country that exists in the world, Canada. The vote in the Senate was to remove the president's power to declare an emergency involving Canada.
Taxes should not be enacted by one person. So I will vote today to end the emergency. I will vote today to try to reclaim the power of taxation, the power of the tariff, to where the Constitution designated it should properly be, and that is in Congress.
While the Senate was voting tonight against Donald Trump, after-hours trading showed a stock market crash in the making, which will leave Wall Street in fear of tomorrow morning's opening bell. Donald Trump didn't want to see an active, ongoing stock market crash during his announcement today, so he made his announcement after the markets closed on Wall Street. Even before he spoke today, the Wall Street Journal called Donald Trump's plan, quote, the dumbest trade war in history. And after Donald Trump revealed his biggest tax increase in history today, the Wall Street Journal said, quote, tariffs are taxes. Donald Trump's years of lying about foreign countries paying Donald Trump's tariffs have crashed into the brick wall of reality. No foreign country has ever paid a tariff imposed by the United States of America. No country on earth is empowered in any way to impose taxes of any kind on another country. Everyone knows that, except Donald Trump and the supporters who he fooled. The Wall Street Journal said, tariffs are taxes. Car prices will rise by thousands of dollars, including those made in America. In the demented rhetoric unique to Donald Trump, he decided to call today Liberation Day. And it turned out he was right. It was Liberation Day for 4 Republican United States senators who finally summoned the strength to vote against Donald Trump and defeat him in the United States Senate. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. She's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator Klobuchar, we've been waiting a long time to see something like what happened on the Senate floor tonight.
That's for certain, and it was an incredible moment because Tim Kaine and Mark Warner and myself led that bill, and I think at the beginning no one thought the resolution, this could never go through. But because we have been fighting them in the courts, in Congress, and with our constituents by our side, our constituents have had it. They go to the grocery store, the prices are up. And now they're starting to see lumber go up. And they're starting to see gas prices go up. And all of this is in part caused in a big, big way by these tariffs. And the thought that Donald Trump has now landed 10% across the world on all these countries, even more on our allies in Europe, it's going to cause even more problems for the economy. But we had a victory tonight in part because we have been relentless in taking this on. You saw Cory Booker yesterday. You saw the Wisconsin results and what happened in Pennsylvania last week. We are in this fight in a big way, and we're standing up for our constituents, farmers, small businesses, consumers who, yes, Lawrence, it's a $5,000 tax per family, all these tariffs together. So I don't call it Liberation Day. I call it National Sales Tax Day. And that's exactly what Donald Trump did to people today.
That, we're changing the name of it right now, National Sales Tax Day. Let's listen to what Senator Booker said about this during his record-setting 25-hour speech.
Donald Trump made commitments to America. We have quotes of him at rally after rally. I'm going to bring your, he used to say, oh, grocery, that's a really great word, I think he said. I'm going to bring down grocery prices. Well, grocery prices are up dramatically. The American dream, and many of us see that as owning a home. Well, you said it, home prices are already up, but with these tariffs, they could go upwards of 10% more. You can be sure that Canadian lumber coming down here is going to be expensive.
I was reading the Minneapolis Star-Tribune today, reporting their concerns, worries about what these tariffs mean in Minnesota. What does it mean to your voters?
Well, first of all, tourism from Canada is down 70%. That's nationally. People are pissed off, Lawrence. First, they were shocked, and now they're mad. And so that is a major factor that's going to go on all around the world. People are going to make decisions. We've got farmers that need Canadian potash for fertilizer. We have got others that sell their soybeans all over the world. And what happens is these other countries say, wait a minute, I can get stuff from Brazil. I can get stuff from another country. And then we lose those contracts forever. We're the fourth biggest ag exporting state in the nation. So I see it firsthand. And these rural areas especially are going to be hit by this hard. So, we were joined today by the steelworkers are on our side on this, a number of other unions. We have got the Retail Association with us on this. And wait a minute, the Chamber of Commerce endorsed this resolution today. So you're right, this is the first major crack. And I'm so glad you understand the significance of this for the American people in terms of prices going up even more than they've already gone up, but also the political significance that we stood up and we won.
The Canadian border states seem to have a much clearer view of this than many other states. And I'm wondering if you suspect that in that election in Wisconsin yesterday for a state Supreme Court justice, which seems unrelated to Canadian tariffs, I'm wondering if the madness of these Canadian tariffs in a Canadian border state could have had an influence, in your view, in that election.
Oh, I've thought about this, Lawrence, because I went there on Saturday to rural areas. They had me with the Wisconsin party chair in Eau Claire and in La Crosse. We went all the way up to Ashland, right in the northern part of Wisconsin. Tariffs came up at every stop. And I don't think it was necessarily the deciding factor. You could see the court jester in the White House for that, Elon Musk, with his $20 million in the race and then showing up in Green Bay, a city where the people actually own the football team and they don't want to have a multi-billionaire telling them what to do. But the fact that 10 counties in Wisconsin turned to the incredible new justice on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, Judge Crawford, and voted for her. Those were counties, 10 of them, that had gone for Trump in the last election. So it wasn't just the turnout in these major cities, which was very important. It was also changing voters that are independents, that are in the middle, that turned out. So I think it's a really important thing to remember that the courts, right, people see them as a check. State courts, federal courts, they're the check right now on what he's doing to them economically. And that, of course, includes these tariffs. And while the courts may not be able to get involved in the tariffs, it's an economic issue. And those people that voted for Donald Trump, I know, because a number of them voted for me in my state in the last election, they want to have a fair shake. They want to bring costs down. They believed he could do it, and it's been completely the opposite. Chaos is up, corruption is up, and yet costs are up. Ask anyone in the grocery aisle.
Senator Amy Klobuchar, thank you very much for starting off our discussions tonight.
Thank you very much, Lawrence.
Thank you, Senator. Coming up from
are quiet. An unusual calm has settled over this opposition stronghold in Istanbul. Protests sparked by the arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu have morphed into a nationwide consumer boycott launched by student groups.
It's like a test. What happens if we stop all consumption and create an economic impact? I think it's important for young people too. It gives a way to participate for those who can't join protests or marches, but still want to be part of the movement.
The main opposition party, CHP, already calling for a boycott of pro-government companies, backed the initiative and declared a national no-shopping day.
Across the Gaza Strip, where the Israeli forces attacked an UNRWA clinic in Jabalia, killing at least 22 Palestinians that were seeking refuge in this clinic. Among the 22 Palestinians was 16 children. Now, according to health officials, they also received injured Palestinians, which were children, women, and the elderly. This was a place Palestinians were seeking refuge, but also the Israeli forces targeted more residential areas and more tents where Palestinians are seeking refuge in different areas across the Gaza Strip. They also targeted a group of people in Deir al-Balah. Now, in Khan Yunis, at least 10 farmers were killed today. the situation in the Gaza Strip escalates as the Israeli forces also announced an expansion of a ground invasion in Rafah. And Rafah is one of the third biggest cities across the Gaza Strip. Palestinians have been on the move since they received evacuation orders from the Israeli forces to evacuate the area. Now, it's not only the continuous airstrikes and the artillery shelling, but it's also the humanitarian situation where Palestinians are unable to secure a meal for their children, and also after all the bakeries across the Gaza Strip closed. Now, the situation continues to deteriorate across the Gaza Strip, and Palestinians are left without any option. There's continuous airstrikes and mass starvation. This is Hind Al-Khudari, Al Jazeera, Deir al-Balah, Gaza, Palestine.
He has been a star for most of his life, beginning at his public high school in New Jersey, where he was a football star, and then an All-American football star tight end at Stanford before becoming a Rhodes Scholar, a Yale Law School graduate, the most famous and one of the youngest city councilors in America before becoming a big city mayor, a United States senator, presidential candidate. But last night, Cory Booker stepped beyond his Senate stardom and took his place in history. And while he was at it, he gave the Democrats their voice. He gave the Democrats their voice and became the leader of the opposition to what he eloquently described as the cruelties of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Cory Booker now has the record for holding the Senate floor longer than any other senator in history. He had to beat South Carolina segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond to win that record, a record Strom Thurmond set in 1957 by speaking for 24 hours and 18 minutes against human rights for American citizens and in favor of segregation of American citizens. Strom Thurmond's filibuster was one of the darkest days in Senate history. The world didn't know then that the racist, segregationist senator speaking for over 24 hours was secretly the father of at least one black child, which was proved after Senator Thurmond's death. Senator Thurmond's family has since embraced their secret black relatives when the DNA tests proved conclusive. At 7:17 p.m. last night, Cory Booker said this.
I'm getting close to a record, folks, but there's a room here in the Senate named after Strom Thurmond. To hate him was wrong. And maybe my ego got too caught up that if I stood here, maybe, just maybe I could break this record of the man who tried to stop the rights upon which I stand. I'm not here, though, because of his speech. I'm here despite his speech. I'm here because as powerful as he was, the people were more powerful.
And so the white racist segregationist's record was broken in a way that was unimaginable to that racist. Broken by a black senator. Cory Booker's speech was unlike anything we have ever seen before. I have never seen the majority leader or minority leader support a filibuster. Usually a filibuster is a desperate and hopeless attempt to block the progress of a compromise bill that both leaders actually support. And Senate leaders usually prefer order over the chaos of a filibuster. But Monday night, after midnight, there was the Senate leader, Chuck Schumer, on the Senate floor supporting Cory Booker when really no one was watching by asking Senator Booker nice, long questions that allowed Senator Booker to rest his voice. That is the very point of the long questions asked by senators who support the filibuster. Their long questions allow the Speaker to preserve vocal strength. But in the questions that the Democratic senators presented to Senator Booker, those senators found their voices too. Those senators reached bursts of eloquence and clarity about what is at stake this year in American government that most of them have not reached before. The Democratic senators helping Cory Booker did not show up with prepared statements to read as they do so often on the Senate floor. They just improvised. And there was something else that we've never seen in a filibuster before. Not a single word of opposition, not one. It is very common during filibusters for opponents to ask challenging questions of the Speaker. It is very common for opponents to be on the Senate floor challenging the Speaker to take their questions. And the Speakers always do take some questions from their opponents. Not one Republican dared to confront Cory Booker on the Senate floor, not one. And that makes it more than fair to assume that there wasn't a single honest thing a Republican could say in response to anything Cory Booker said. And we have never seen a senator as full-voiced and energetic as Cory Booker was after 24 hours of speaking, after 25 hours of speaking. There was no difference between his first hour and his last hour. And every other senator who has tried this has physically weakened and vocally weakened as the hours wear on, but not Cory Booker.
He, in the highest office of our land, wants to divide us against ourselves, wants to make us afraid, wants to make us fear so much that we're willing to violate people's fundamental rights. We're willing to go after the speech on college campuses. We're willing to go after law firms, go after the freedom of the press. Don't let him do that. Don't become like him. Be an American that says, I look to the future and I'm excited. Yes, things are tough right now. They're hard, they're scary, they're hurting, but we can overcome this. Our American history, if it's nothing else, American history, if it's nothing else, it is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of impossible things against impossible odds.
Impossible things against impossible odds. After Cory Booker's 25 hours and 4 minutes on the Senate floor, the odds don't seem so impossible anymore. Coming up, we have someone who wants to...
British-made products will face tariffs of 10% from this Saturday. 10% is the baseline tariff applying to all countries in the world. There will, though, be higher, more punitive tariffs on about 60 other countries, which Mr. Trump sees as the worst offenders when it comes to trade imbalances with the United States. For example, 34% tariffs on goods from China. Well, the president also confirmed a 25% tariff on foreign-made cars effective from midnight US time. He said that together, all these tariffs will raise hundreds of billions of dollars a year for the United States, making, in his words, America wealthy again. Well, the president has been speaking in the Rose Garden of the White House on what he's billed as America's Liberation Day, though for many around the world there are now fears of a global trade war, economic slowdown and recession. Well, tonight we'll have analysis and reaction from around the UK and across the world throughout the programme. We'll be hearing from our economics editor, Faisal Islam, and also from our political editor, Chris Mason, on how the UK government will react to these 10% tariffs on British goods. But first, let's go to Sarah Smith at the White House. And Sarah, Donald Trump saying this is one of the most important days in US history.
Yes, he says that economic moves like this haven't been done since the Second World War, and that he is declaring economic independence for the United States. So as you said, there will be tariffs ranging from 10% all the way up to 50% being charged on different countries to export their goods into the United States. And Donald Trump explained that he has set these tariffs depending on how other countries treat US exports. Have a listen to what he had to say.
Wherever the road takes you, Chevy.
Historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that.
Now, by reciprocal, we should explain what that means, because it's not just a direct tariff for tariff. What's happened is that the White House have calculated all the different ways in which they see trade barriers. So that could be straight tariffs. It could be other non-tariff barriers, like, for instance, technical restrictions, maybe a ban on imports of something like genetically modified corn or hormone-injected beef, that sort of thing. If you need a license to import goods from America, that also counts. They talk about currency manipulation and even the theft of intellectual property. So there are lots and lots of ways in which they have come up with some kind of sum that they say represents the totality of the tariffs that American goods are faced when they are being exported into China or Cambodia or the EU or the UK, for instance. They've come up with a number which, for instance, in Cambodia's case is 97% is what they say the tariff on American goods going there is. So they're halving that and charging 49%. With the EU, they say that they had added up all of the different restrictions they see between trade between the US and the EU. They brought that to 39%, and that's why there's a 20% tariff going on. But other countries that don't fall under this heading, a blanket 10% tariff is being put on all other goods, and that's where the UK falls.
OK, Sarah, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. So as we've been hearing, the UK is facing 10% tariffs on the goods it exports to the US. Well, earlier today, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, indicated the UK government will not rush to retaliate against new American tariffs. And in the comments, the Prime Minister said Britain will take a calm, pragmatic approach and continue talks with the US about a wider trade deal.
For the UK, and at base, although we heard a lot about reciprocal tariffs, so tit for tat, quid pro quo, based on what is done to America right now, at base there's a 10% universal tariff for everybody. So it may be a relief that the UK is at that lower ebb, but that still means $6 billion on that. Maybe if you include the cars, $7 billion of extra costs. But the point of this, we hear, is to divert trade flows. I think we can see the document that was held up by President Trump there, and you see a whole sort of list, and in the blue there you see what America thinks is being done to it. And it isn't just the tariff, as Sarah was saying, it's currency manipulation and other trade barriers. And President Trump says he's being kind by only sort of replying with half of that. But there are some huge numbers there, including some rather poor countries, some crisis countries like Myanmar and Laos and Bangladesh. They're on 37%, China on 34%. Well, that's huge. European Union on 20% when the UK is on 10%. Well, that's a net benefit, you might argue, for the UK, but also it could create some distortions to trade. The bottom
gave these back-to-back gestures that people are saying mimicked a Nazi salute. You see it there. Elon Musk has not directly addressed this, but he has appeared to edit out that gesture from the video that he posted on X, the platform he, of course, owns. Help us understand what transpired.
Thank you.
Oh, careful. Careful with that salute.
It wasn't even like a subtle, like a wave, like one of these, like a...
It's okay, it's good to be proud of German culture, German values, and not to lose that in some sort of multiculturalism that dilutes everything.
That's what a Nazi would say.
We don't want Italy as a culture to disappear. We don't want France as a culture to disappear. I think we have to maintain the sort of reasonable cultural identity of the various countries. Or they simply will not be those countries.
Aber der ist wahrscheinlich für Sie auch ein Nazi. Hm? Nazis, Nazis, Nazis, lauter Nazis.
USA, USA, USA, USA, USA. Ah! Yes.
No, dog. No, this is the Charlie Chaplin mustache.
This is really amazing. I love Tesla.
You gotta come down to White House Tesla Auto Mall.
This is really amazing. I love Tesla. I love Tesla.
You gotta come.
I love Tesla.
You gotta come.
I love Tesla.
You gotta.
The dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
In my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with the loss if I'm at 40%.
We recognize that. Faced with external failure, the Nazi leader was focusing on a perceived enemy within instead.
namely the Jews. Given that we now know the was commencing, this makes for poignant reading. And you don't have to go much further from there to connect the horrors of the Third Reich to the promises and the lies of the Trump campaign. The lies he repeated during the presidential debate about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs, painting them as monsters, was compared by multiple outlets to the blood libel, the age-old conspiracy theory that Jewish people used the blood of Christian children to make matzah, the textbook anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, and on its face, a ludicrous smear. So too are these lies about Haitians. Although I don't quite feel comfortable drawing a direct line here for reasons of, well, history, and also because animals and babies, they're two different things. The spirit, however, is there, and the smears work in the same way. People who are already primed to hate the target of the smear will use it to justify and intensify their pre-existing disgust, and will push them from irritation and harsh words closer to outright violence. Those who recognize it rightly as a falsehood dismiss it as ridiculous, because it is. But it is important that we recognize that it is as dangerous as it is false. This is an important tool in radicalizing the people that Trump needs to get his violent work done.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
You don't need to be a historian to see the obvious connections between accusing Jews of eating children and Haitians of eating pets. And since the Haitian Revolution, Americans have
many of them. It's just this amorphous group of people. But they're smart and they're vicious. And we have to defeat them. And when I say the enemy from within, the other side goes crazy. Like one real rough, nasty day, and I mean real rough, the word will get out and it will end immediately. He's Hitler. And then they say, he's a Nazi. I'm not a Nazi. I'm the opposite of a Nazi.
Far north, they've kept their promise for 80 years, never to forget. On that day, Nazi occupiers murdered 16 Polish partisans. A monument marks the spot where they were hanged, the town's residents forced to watch. Today, with Russia looming and US power in apparent retreat from Europe, they listen as local leaders warn of a new threat.
A ceremony like this that happens every year takes on particular significance this year, as the lessons of history point to the future, now more uncertain than ever.
This monument is testament to those people who refused to give up and who, despite the German occupation, chose to fight for our independence. In life, they were frequently disappointed, among others by the allies who were supposed to be here for us, but did not come.
The Nazis gave way to decades of Soviet influence before democracy arrived with Russia's borders rolled back. They would eventually be met by the European Union and NATO, the three intersecting in the so-called Suwalki Gap. It used to be a tourist attraction. The barbed wire is new. Ukrainians have come here too, a stopover on the wartime refugee exodus route. Some have stayed, keenly aware that danger can lie where layers of history overlap.
In my opinion, the most important thing is having a car nearby, so that I can jump in and leave quickly.
Anya believes a future war with Russia will start here, in Suwalki. Vladimir Putin, emboldened by Western appeasement, she says, taking on EU and NATO member Lithuania, with only the allied armies of Europe in his way.
History tends to repeat itself. I read about the events leading up to World War II, when Czechoslovakia was given up in the name of peace, only for Hitler to start the war just 2 years later. The situation feels eerily similar.
So that remembering what has passed is as much a reminder of what may lie ahead.
City of Hodeidah. The attacks reportedly targeted the water supply management building. The U.S. has been bombing Yemen since mid-March after the Houthis threatened to resume attacks on Israel-linked ships in the Red Sea. The attacks have killed more than 60 people, including women and children. Mohammed Al-Attab is in Yemen's capital, Sana'a. Mohammed, what more are you learning about these strikes?
Yes, recently we are talking about yesterday the United States fighter jets have bombed different areas under the control of Ansar Allah. They have bombed Sa'da, Al-Hodeidah and also Hajjah. In Hajjah they have bombed Washha district. with nearly 3 air bombing, and we are talking about also bombing the city of Sa'da with nearly 5 air raids. Also, they have bombed this water supply management building in Al-Mansouriya district in Al-Hudaydah, western the country. At least 6 people have been killed in that attack, and also many others have been injured. We are talking about that we are witnessing an increasing spike of these attacks, and also a decline of these attacks. According to the Houthis military spokesperson Yahya Sariyah, he mentioned that there is an ongoing escalation and also attacks between they have attacked yesterday the United States vessels, and especially we are talking about the fighter jets carrier USS Harry Truman, and that many believe that these attacks are preventing the United States fighter jets from bombing different areas under the control of Houthis, especially preventing the spike of these attacks on their territories. Also, the sources, the medical sources that belong to the Ansar Allah, they say that they condemned these attacks, especially those attacks that target the residential areas and also governmental infrastructure. They have says that these attacks are unlawful and also violates the Geneva Pact.
Continuing large-scale military exercises around the island of Taiwan for a second day. Beijing says the war games are designed to practice precision strikes on Taiwan's key ports and energy facilities. On Tuesday, the Chinese military surrounded the self-ruled island with planes and warships to practice blockading Taiwan, which Beijing considers part of China.
Challenger, not he is going to challenge. He dropped the flag before he could throw it, so Rodgers instead runs the play, and it's a touchdown to Conklin. Tyler Conklin in the end zone. And Rodgers going to try to throw for it inside and gets the 2 with Garrett Wilson, and the Jets take a 9. 2nd and 7, Rodgers, shot to the sideline, Lazard, the back shoulder adjustment, and the deep drop, Rodgers steps up, fires.
With the 1st and goal, Rodgers caught, touch.
2nd and 2, trying to get it back to a 2-score lead. Rodgers scans, Rodgers dances, Rodgers runs and throws, touchdown!